Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the American Brain Coalition special webinar today. We're thrilled to have our guests and really to explore this topic of advancing responsible animal research advocacy. And we couldn't do what we do without our membership in this coalition. So we appreciate all of you attending and appreciate you guys being members of the American Brain Coalition. So with that, I will hand it over to our esteemed moderator, Laura Weidner, who is also our advocacy committee chair. Laura, take it away.
Thanks so much. Welcome, everyone, and thank you all for joining us for this important conversation. I'm Laura Weidner, as was just said. I am the Chief Advocacy and Government Relations Officer at the Epilepsy Foundation of America and currently the American Brain Coalition Advocacy Committee Chair. Today's discussion comes at a critical moment when animal research is facing increasing scrutiny, misinformation, and legislative pressure. At the same time, the need for accurate, ethical, and science-based advocacy has never been more urgent, especially in advancing treatments for neurological and psychiatric disorders. The American Brain Coalition is proud to have joined the People for Effective and Ethical Research, or PEER Coalition. This partnership reflects ABC's commitment to promoting responsible and humane animal research, supporting transparency and public understanding, and ensuring that policies are grounded in science and ethics. Today, we're especially pleased to welcome Dr. Naomi Charalambakis. I practiced it but failed there. I apologize, Doctor. Who is the Director of Communications and Science Policy at Americans for Medical Progress. She is leading the peer initiative and brings deep expertise in science communication, policy advocacy, and public engagement around animal research. With that, I will turn it over to Naomi so that ABC members can learn more about PEER's initiative.
Well, thank you so much for having me. As a neuroscientist, I will always say yes to giving presentations to a neuroscience community. So I'm really excited to chat a little bit more about PEER and everything that it is intended to do, how to get involved. So let me get my slides up and running, and then we can kick things off. Okay, hopefully you can see the correct presentation mode.
We can, looks great.
Okay, perfect. So again, thanks so much for joining today. And I won't talk too long because I do want to hear questions or concerns that the broader community has about this topic. As mentioned, we are hitting a critical point where animal research, policy, and they're all kind of intersecting and almost escalating in many, many ways. So my name's Naomi Charalambakis. I am the Director of Communications and Science Policy for Americans for Medical Progress. But today I'm going to wear my peer hat, People for Effective and Ethical Research. And it is it's a strong coalition. It's growing. It's really amazing what we've been able to do so far in a good way to just try and come together in advance this important goal of responsible animal research advocacy. So why should we care? Just to kind of as a baseline, and I think we can all agree here that without a stable policy framework, without sustained support for animal research, it's going to be vulnerable to disruption, to uncertainty, to premature elimination of very necessary models and resources. And then when that happens, when we lose those critical disease models, there are going to be delays in new drugs and therapies. There's going to be fewer veterinary advances. You're going to have a loss of critical workforce and infrastructure, not to mention a reduced U.S. national scientific competitiveness. China is ramping up their efforts to enhance biomedical research, specifically with animals, because they recognize that that's where, true progress lies. And if that happens, our research is not just going to stop like the animal rights groups want it to, it's actually going to move overseas to areas where animal research is actually less regulated. So these are all some of the risks that there is if we don't have this stable policy framework and sustained support for this work. And as we kind of noted at the top, especially in the last year plus, the landscape around animal research is changing so fast. Every day there is new information. It's hard to keep up. To-do lists go out the window because you're just trying to respond to the latest information and try to stay one step ahead, but that's becoming increasingly hard. And when policy decisions are now being shaped without scientific context, that's when things can get really dangerous and scary. So, how did we get here? I think it's important to take a step back for a second and talk about how we got here, because the end of the day, animal rights groups are shifting their tactics, and it's important to recognize that it's not just about this typical provocative demonstrations and protests and these signs and um, going after institutions and the harassment of scientists. Those are all still very real and still very happening. But over the last 5, 6, 7 years, I would say there's been an quiet but very effective new approach that they're using to expand their efforts and play the long game. So at the top, you see here, just last year, they're sponsoring congressional hearings. Transgender lab rats. How many of you remember that? That went viral and it's still being talked about. And no, they do not mean transgenic mice. They meant they are going directly after research that dealt with biomedical hormones and research that dealt with, how the reproductive system is changing, how to advance those therapies and strategies for people dealing with metabolic and hormone disorders, IVF research, all of those things. And they were just manipulating that and taking advantage of the anti-DEI rhetoric at the time and calling it transgender lab rats. We're seeing CDC close down its internal primate research center, which affects a lot of infectious disease research. And just last week, we saw HHS on its LinkedIn and all over its social media pages promote PETA explicitly. So these are very real changes that are happening all simultaneously. How do we deal with this? And that's kind of where peer came about. It's like, this is not just up to one individual, and this is not up to one organization or one institution. We all have a collective vested interest in this on how do we push back against this awful and dangerous rhetoric. So that's where peer comes in. Here, People for Effective and Ethical Research. We are a coalition made up of scientific societies, advocacy organizations, veterinary associations, research institutions, as well as industry partners that have recently come on, all together committed to strengthening the animal research community's presence in specifically the legislative and policy-making arenas, where the decisions are being made that affect funding levels, that affect how initiatives are being implemented, funding priorities at NIH. All of those are discussions that we're actively having. So the name really is, intentional in how we did that, trying to be a little bit clever here, but it really does reflect a core belief is that we all collectively believe that science is strongest when researchers and advocates see one another as partners, that we come together toward enhancing better science, improved health outcomes, and elevating the standards of ethics and openness about the work that we do. It's time we shift some of our talking points. It's time to kind of address these hard issues head on and be very clear about where we stand, where the policy direction is going, and how animal research plays an integral role in all of that. So some of the key areas that we're focused on is legislative engagement, federal agency relationship building, especially the decision makers at the NIH level that are really setting the tone for all of these new changes that we're seeing, resource development. So we're actively currently working on building some fact sheets and resources that can be used broadly as a coalition. And just how do we better coordinate and make sure we are reiterating the same talking points, we're reinforcing each other's messaging while also elevating each other's area of expertise. For our neuroscience folks, if there is a neuroscience specific threat or question, we want to really lean on those partners. If there is a veterinary specific aspect that we really need to highlight, we rely on our veterinary associations and seek out their help for all of this. So it's really about just leveraging each other's strengths in this coalition. And as I said at the bottom, as it says, working to ensure science has a seat at the table. That's really the end goal, because right now we don't have a clear and consistent voice at the table, but the animal rights groups do. And that's where peer is trying to seek change there. So again, why was peer created? It really kind of dawned, it kind of happened organically. So when I actually attended this transgender lab rats hearing in person, was very traumatizing. I needed about a week to recover. That was not the easiest thing to listen to in the audience. But after that hearing, we were working. I sent a few emails around like, hey, this is not just a one and done. This signals that something is missing and we need to do something about it. Should we put our heads together and just have a chat amongst organizations that, are very passionate about animal research and just strategize from here on out? Because we realize there is a missing voice at the table, a unified voice, and that it's no longer effective to just be reactive. That I think we need to be a little bit better at playing the long game, being 2, 3, 4 steps ahead of where the animal rights groups are going. And how do we do that? Because I can't do it alone, and organizations singly can't do it. So how do we come together and just band our resources? So again, this is really just aimed at, it kind of came together and we started meeting more regularly because we kept seeing this increasing influence of the anti-animal research groups, both at the Capitol Hill level, but also at the federal agencies. And going a little bit more in depth in this hearing here, I want to show this very influence that I'm talking about. At this hearing, there were 3 witnesses that you see here. Justin Goodman is from White Coat Waste that you may be familiar with. He actually just testified again last week in front of a small business committee hearing, again on the House side. Actually, no, the Senate side. And then in the middle, you have Dr. Paul Locke. He, out of those 3, was the more measured voice at the table, but he is very much wanting and pushing to remove animal research. But he came across as, these alternatives are wonderful and great, but we do need an off ramp. We're not going to get rid of animal research yesterday, just like Justin Goodman and this next witness kind of claimed to be. Last one was Elizabeth Baker. She worked for the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine. She very clearly and was very adamant in her testimony and in her answers to defund the National Primate Research Centers, and was just very open about, you cannot torture and abuse, and the same old animal rights activists talking points. And speaking of Elizabeth Baker, that hearing took place in February 2025. Just a few months later, it was announced that she is now working at NIH through as a contract position. So she is actively behind the scenes setting the policies and priorities for NIH. She is very much leading the charge on shutting down the primate research centers. So in effect, we should not be surprised that this is happening. It doesn't make it okay, but this is where I wanted to put the pieces together for everyone here listening that this is concerning, and we do need to be a little bit more open and aggressive in our approach, at least on Capitol Hill and at the policy level. I mean, you've got PETA praising the announcement, and that's equally concerning. So that's kind of where the state of play is, and there's a lot more examples as well. So what makes peer different? Because I think the beauty of advocacy is there can be so many simultaneous advocacy initiatives and working groups and things that are happening all at the same time, which are all equally important. And I love that. I want to uplift and help each other as best we can. But I do also want to lay out what makes peer a little bit differently is that we try to do what individual organizations can't do alone. So instead of being reactive, we try to be more proactive. Instead of having an individual statement or an individual organizational voice, we have a unified coalition voice. I know in the nonprofit and advocacy space, it can often be slow in terms of getting your internal approval process going and making sure it runs up the chain before you can get something posted. But in this policy landscape, you got to be nimble. You got to be quick, especially because animal rights groups don't wait for an approval process. They just blast it out all over social media. So what kind of mechanism can we implement here that is a little bit more nimble and timely to just this ever-changing landscape we're seeing? And instead of being a little bit more risk averse, which is completely okay and understandable, especially if you are a research institution, have an organization that is willing to address head on some of these hard topics, and so if you can't do it alone as your individual, let peer do it. So that's kind of the thinking and the overall approach of what makes peer a bit differently. How we operate is we are pretty active. We work every month and have different committees and working groups. So, and we really do encourage all perspectives to get involved and to lend your expertise. So we have a steering committee that meets once a month regularly to discuss, okay, what do we want to talk about this month? What are you all hearing? And how can we it's a smaller core group of individuals that helps inform and plan the next meeting. We have active working groups that meet throughout the month. Communications and outreach, this is where we work on building advocacy resources. We have a peer Hill Day planning committee. And I'll get to that in the next slide, a little bit more about our annual event. And then we have a state strategies group and institutions where if you have a specific state issue or a crisis come up, where state and research institutions can come together and talk about, I just had this like massive FOIA request come through, and then, oh wait, we did too, and what are you all doing? And sharing those strategies together so you can have not in this big coalition meeting, but in more of like a smaller space where you can actively work together. So the coalition meets once a month, and again we meet throughout the month as well on off cycle with our working groups, and then in between, if we need to, we issue routine information. We email the whole coalition. For example, if the NIH director is getting ready to testify on the Hill, and we just heard about it, we send out a note, and we really do try to be very strategy focused, not just an area where we kind of review everything that's happened in the news and kind of lament everything that's going on. We really want to be, okay, what do we do next? Let's not just talk about it, let's do something. So that's the kind of operational framework behind peer. And Capitol Hill Day is an event that we started in our first year where we really tried to, we have this broad range of organizations. Let's all come together to advocate for the continued need for animals in research, but while sharing how critical these NAMs are, but how they must work together with animals to advance stronger science. That it's not a either or, it's a both and approach. And how do we get that message across on Capitol Hill? So in our first year, we had 27 participants, as you see here in this picture, from 11 organizations, 23 meetings with legislators. We met with some in person, and we had folders with leave behinds. Follow-up meetings were planned. This year's Hill Day is scheduled for September 29th. We tried to get in just before the end of the fiscal year because if there's a shutdown, we don't want any struggles at the airports and whatnot. So there is a little bit of strategy behind the date there. So just kind of rounding things out, and then just happy to open it up for questions and broader discussion. But why do we need this coalition? I hope it's already been made clear now, but it's worth reemphasizing that the media narratives, these policy decisions are being shaped in real time. It's really hard to keep up. And it's concerning that scientific voices are underrepresented. They are often have to be filtered through institutional constraints, completely necessary and appropriate, but it's still frustrating in this policy moment that we're in. And there's also just legal and reputational limitations, a slow internal approval processes. So peers' role, again, as I previously stated, we are trying to be more nimble and a unified voice, and it's informed by so many different groups, and that enables us to have like a more collective, informed decision-making process, and we can act quickly, and we're willing to engage on some of the sensitive issues that are happening right now that a lot of people don't want to touch. We encourage them to be open and honest about it, but recognize that some people are still hesitant and aren't capable of doing that for various reasons. So peer is going to be the one to stick their neck out there. So what does peer provide to the members? Again, you get access to just shared intelligence and information sharing. You have this early awareness of animal research issues, since a lot of these groups focus on this issue exclusively and monitor this all day. We have coordinated advocacy strategy. We have messaging alignment that can really help inform your own individual organizational talking points. resource sharing. And we also really try to be helpful and help uplift each other, especially if there's a crisis that happens or an activist campaign. You have this trusted network of colleagues that you can come to with advice or just, hey, I'm throwing this out there. We're dealing with this. Has anyone else dealt with this? And what did you do? How did you handle it? Or what are your all's thoughts? And that's always it's a helpful resource because having a safe space can sometimes be hard to find. Our future vision and growth is we're really trying to build this infrastructure and this support system in the research community that, where we can be confident and clear in animal research advocacy, that we are not ashamed about this work, that we recognize how critical it is, and if it's taken away, there will be some very damaging repercussions. So in that vein, we're trying to expand membership and our broader reach to different organizations, establish more shared policy priorities, especially as this administration developments occur and keep dropping, where do we stand on those issues? Grow Capitol Hill engagement. So try to get more people to come to Capitol Hill Day, get more organizations to attend. Increase our visibility and relationships with federal agencies so that they recognize, peer is a coalition. We're here representing a broad range of perspectives, and we're here in representing one goal, and help strengthen rapid response capabilities so that we don't always feel like we're playing catch up. If you do want to get involved, so these are it's not exactly open to anyone and everyone. We do want to be strategic in who is actually participating in these calls, for good reason, because we know how unwieldy things can get if any and everyone can get involved. But we are looking for government affairs staff, communications, public affairs staff at your advocacy organization or your research institution, other advocacy leaders, animal research, or these new approach methodology subject matter experts. That's really helpful in, shaping our priorities and our resources, and other organizational representatives like the executive director, vice president, a committee chair. Those are all welcome to attend. And the expectations are pretty basic: active participation in the calls, and then sharing the information that you learn from those meetings with your colleagues and your broader networks. So that is, and if you're interested, this is my email. Happy to chat offline a little bit more about peer, why it's needed, what we're doing, what we're thinking about. But I hope this was a helpful overview, and we're really grateful for the American Brain Coalition's partnership, as well as many of you online that I see familiar faces and names. It's just really good to have this community, and we're hoping to just grow and expand and get ourselves out there.
Yes, very helpful. Thank you so much for that overview. This is not an issue area that I'm super immersed in, and I know many ABC members, especially with the issues bubbling up again. We wanted to make sure that ABC members are educated, so really appreciate that overview. And also just very impressive what Peer has managed to do, just having started about a year ago. So congratulations on all your great work. We do have time for questions, so I'd love to get some from others who are on the webinar. You can raise your hand and unmute yourself, or if you want to put your question in the chat, we will be monitoring that. As always, host prerogative, I'll kick it off as we hopefully get some questions in queue. But you touched on this a bit, but what would you say are the most significant misconceptions about animal research that are shaping public opinion right now?
The biggest one that you'll hear is that it's unnecessary, that it's outdated, and that you have these alternatives, these non-animal methods that are more effective, cheaper, safer, and it's just a waste of tax dollars, and it's just a way for scientists to get money and profit off of it. I think that is the main one that's gaining traction right now, but they have talking points that they recycle through, that whatever hits on the political cultural moment at the time, they then bring it back out and use it to their advantage. So that was the biggest misconception. And what I get frustrated with is when we talk about these alternatives, a lot of times it's this like blanket, alternatives are ready. And there's no nuance to it. It's very black and white. You can do away with animals altogether. And then the scientists may rebut and say, Well, no, not quite yet. But there's no like deeper explanation, or at least in a way that, a non-scientist or someone on the Capitol Hill might understand. So I think it's important, and Peer is currently building a resource where we're breaking down where NAMs, we call it the three bucket approach. And Europe has already outlined some resources already, and we're using that as kind of like a baseline to inform the US version. Three buckets meaning the first bucket one is where are NAMs pretty much already ready and actively used in and can be used in place of a lot of different animal tests, skin sensitization, the eye irritation test. All of these have come such a long way, particularly in the toxicological space, because those endpoints and the question that they're asking is far more narrow and easier to capture than, say, a broader biomedical research issue. So that would be bucket one. And that can provide some clear examples of where NAMs are being used and are already helping, phase out the use of animals. Bucket two's almost there, not quite. We need more investment. We need more validation testing. It would require more animal research. Bucket three is we are a long way off. We can't answer Alzheimer's on a chip. We can't answer and understand dementia just with an AI model. We're just not there yet, and this is why. And so I think delineating that a little bit more for a non-science audience, including lawmakers who don't hear that nuance and that level of detail, it would be really, really helpful. And that's what Peer is trying to get that message out.
Great. Thank you. I don't see any in the chat. Yeah, does anyone have a question? Great. Sarah, go ahead.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. I'm an assistant or associate. I forgot I just got tenure last year. I'm an associate professor. I study animals. I'm a neuroscientist, as probably many of us in the room are. But I was just wondering, like, what, like, does Peer have a TikTok account or their like social media effort? Like, how is this nimble messaging being delivered, and how do we garner the audience of like
Gen
the
Z.
the non-scientist taxpayer? Like, I
Hmm.
don't know. I know I respect the fact that the peer is solving this, like being willing to put your neck out when people like me are unwilling to put my
Sure.
name out, and and make myself a potential target or whatever it might be. And so I just wonder, like, are there people making infographics? Are there like social media experts? Like, how are
Hmm.
you actually doing it besides just like going to the Hill once a year?
No, and that's fair. And that's where like we just kicked off our working groups to like build up our communications and media strategy. So those are all like fairly new. Last year we were kind of surprised to see that people kept wanting to meet monthly, and then it was like, okay, well, wow, we need to formalize this a little bit more. So right now we're building more of a strategic plan that can guide our efforts that we can use to help frame out our short, medium, and long-term goals. And a long-term goal would be having a social media presence to really push back on all of these narratives. Might be a blip in the ocean compared to what the animal rights groups are putting out there, but it is necessary. I wish I was good at TikTok. Still don't understand the platform, but yeah, bringing in communications experts that know social media in and out, that know how to like tweak a headline and get the message in a more effective way to the audience that needs to hear it is definitely on the list of things to do. It's just we're so new in this and trying to figure this out. But now we're kind of in this phase of like, okay, what is a actual strategy that we need to start implementing? But fact sheets and infographics were very like the low-hanging fruit for us. So those are things that are being done currently, and we hope to have those ready in the fall when we go back to the Hill and can spread them widely.
Great. Thanks for the great question and response. And we have another question that came in through the chat from my colleague at the Epilepsy Foundation, Roxanne. So thank
Mhm.
you for that. What are your recommendations on messaging for primate versus non-primate research?
Yeah. I think this goes back to, I think in general, like, why are we using one model over another? It goes back to what is the research question at hand, and what are the tools that you need to answer that question? Um, why do you need a dog versus a mouse? Why do you need a primate versus a mouse? Why can't you do this on a dish? All of those are valid questions. And I think when you're talking about this to the public or someone that is very much on the anti side of research things, you need to, I think it's important to address and not get defensive and say, I recognize this is a really hard issue and that primate research is really sensitive. It's hard to put your mind around, but if you look at the need for it, maybe I can help kind of understand you can understand my perspective. And here's why. I study this, this, and this. The only way to understand this biological process or this disease mechanism is with a brain that better mimics the human brain, and that's going to be the primate. The mouse brain doesn't have a spinal cord, or it does have a spinal cord, but the size of that spinal cord is nowhere near the size of a human, and so the translatability is going to get lost there. It could be good for preliminary studies and therefore can help us reduce the number of primates we ultimately use, but to actually fundamentally understand what um, the disease mechanism is, you have to have a model that can open up those possibilities in the research. So don't be afraid to kind of address it is a hard topic, and people that go into research take this very seriously. It's not easy. You have to have both compassion as well as, a very clear scientific mindset, and being able to balance those in your work is really essential. It's a very unique blend of skills, and I think we often miss out on talking about the compassion and the hard parts of the research that deals with animals, and we just stick to the science, which is good, but it's sometimes not enough because people now are rejecting the facts. They're rejecting the statistics. Get a little bit more at the human and emotional side of it, and that can maybe help break through a little bit, or at least make it more relevant for the audience.
Great, thank you. We have another question in the chat from
Mhm.
Teresa. How would you recommend that researchers get involved in peer? Seems like you're looking for membership who are in leadership roles currently,
Right.
and she notes she would love to stay informed on the issues that you've been talking about.
Yeah, I know. I would love to just welcome anyone and everyone, but again, I think that would get really unwieldy from like a management standpoint. So I always ask people that do participate in peer to then send those messages or things that they've learned downstream to their membership audience, and use that way. But this is growing, and more people want to get involved and find a need and a desire to get more acclimated in policy and advocacy. So I have thought about, creating like a separate group that's just specifically dedicated to researchers and veterinarians that are kind of on the ground and dealing with these issues firsthand. So that is in the back of my mind. I don't want to discount it completely. But I'm right now, that would be hard to do simultaneously when still trying to start up here. But I really recognize and want to help the research community as much as I can. That being said, in my role at AMP, we do specifically help individual researchers and institutions, and we have one-on-one calls and consultations. So if you ever need assistance or want to figure out how to get involved with AMP, we have an individual membership program that is very closely tied to peer. But I'm not here to talk about AMP. I'm here to talk about peer.
Great.
And maybe I can just echo
Yeah.
too that ABC will continue to share
Mhm.
any relevant information. So if you're an ABC member, you'll get a lot of the relevant information from peer.
Great. I could keep, I'm going to keep going. I have one other question I think is important, especially since many of the people on the webinar, it seems like, are pretty immersed in this
Yeah.
area, being either researchers themselves. So there is another group, the Washington Animal Research Network, that they might be aware of. So wanted to ask, do you work with other groups that
Yeah.
ABC is collaborating with, like the Washington Animal Research Network?
Yeah, of course. And as I said, I think that's the beauty of advocacy is that the more voices, the better. And yes, the National Association for Biomedical Research and Foundation for Biomedical Research is part of PEER. And so they attend those calls. We have one member from FBR who is part of the communications and outreach group, really helping us refine some of our resource and advocacy messages. One distinction, though, that I would say between Warren and Peer is I think the meeting frequency. Warren, I think, meets 2 or 3 times a year. Peer meets every month. And we are striving to be a bit more action oriented versus just coming together and sharing our concerns and what we are hearing and having that open discussion, which is great. It's always good to see an even broader group of people coming together. But I think peer is the more like actionable arm and trying to implement a lot of the ideas and the strategies that we're thinking to be more proactive in this space. So both are equally effective and equally needed.
Great. Any other questions from the group? We've had some great ones. Want to give space for that?
I'll ask a question just of some of our smaller members. So we represent some really small organizations that really
Sure.
don't even have a policy shop and maybe don't want to get ahead of this. And I know you touched on it a bit, but what could be kind of some low barrier, like real low hanging fruit or intro to this issue that they might want to engage with their members or make their their members aware of? If you could give that, I think that could be helpful.
Yeah, animal research more broadly and just,
Yes,
yeah,
sorry, animal research more broadly as kind of a start. You know what I mean? Maybe they're
yeah,
not ready to dive right in.
sure, sure. Well, first, I think it would be good to gauge like how many, like if you know that most of your researchers do work with animals, put out a member survey and ask, is this an area that you see some concerns in? Are you facing some threats or concerns in this area that you feel threaten your funding levels or job security or things of that nature that you feel like our organization can be a leader in, or we can connect you with people and be a part of this broader effort. Just asking your member base and seeing what their concerns are and their pain points can help inform, maybe some next steps for you or create first maybe an animals research subcommittee where you can come together as member organizations to talk about these issues. Is there a fact sheet or an FAQ page that you should be creating about your specific area of research and why animals are needed? Maybe those are some low-hanging fruit and then kind of see what the uptake is and go from there, join peer and other coalitions.
Thank you. That's helpful.
Um, Great. And Jen has a question. Over to Jen.
Thanks. And thanks, Naomi. It's a great presentation. Wonderful to hear all that you're doing. I guess my question dovetails off of Katie's, which is that, also within the Brain Coalition, there's a lot of patient advocacy organizations, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of them are really concerned about the condition that they're dealing with. But how do you, or how would you recommend, educating those with lived experience, those who are living with the conditions about the importance of animal research and why and how it helps along the process to be able to get to new treatments.
Yeah, and this is where our messaging that more emphasizes real world outcomes, patient stories is so, so important. I think it's the media tends to not share the behind the scenes of how we got here. They'll report on this new medical breakthrough that saved this child's life. And it is really fascinating. Baby KJ is probably my favorite example to share. This child that was born with a life-threatening rare disease was given a personalized treatment and the child is now thriving. But they didn't think he would live much longer when he was born in 2025. That's just such a touching story. If you dig into the literature, you can find that they used NAMs. They cultured some of his cells from his liver first. Then they went to a transgenic mouse model to kind of further refine and identify the mutation and develop a personalized therapy that could target the mutation. And then it went into primates for safety testing, and then the child. That was all kind of rapidly accelerated to help this child. And that is such an amazing story, but we don't hear that in the New York Times. We don't hear that in Stat News. So, as patient advocacy organizations and scientific organizations, connect those dots. Take a really powerful story and say, did you know that it came from this basic science research that, was decades in the making? And if we don't continue to support that basic and foundational science, we won't have those breakthroughs, or we're going to take those opportunities away from other families that are waiting for a cure. That's why investing in this research is so important. So I've longed, a big, big goal of mine is building more collaborations with patient advocacy groups and scientific societies so that we can come together and share those stories, merge them and elevate them and empower patients to share their stories and really understand, wow, this is science, it's done well, animal research is necessary, and it's really changing human and animal lives. Um, so I would love, with ABC being a part of peer, I would love to really leverage those connections and elevate real human stories because that speaks to people, that speaks to members of Congress. So we need to really lean into that.
So I just have a follow-up really quickly, and I know there's other questions, but Naomi, so it sounds to me like it would be helpful to have people with lived experience
Oh,
at your
yeah.
Hill Day.
Oh, yeah.
So,
I would love
okay.
that.
I know I'm kind of making a plug that, like, if anybody is, I know it's not until September, the end of September, but
It will come
if
quick.
there's folks, yes, it will come quick, and it's a busy time of year, so I can help get folks, scheduled with you. So just wanted to make
Right.
that plug.
I
Great.
would love that. I would love that. That would be
Good.
amazing.
Good.
Could I ask a question?
Yes, please.
Hi, Naomi. I'm Diana Gray, and I'm the CEO of the Hydrocephalus Association.
Oh,
And
nice.
we do fund research and we do support ethical animal research. And so, what I was thinking about in your presentation was that we are also, in addition to being part of this wonderful American Brain Coalition, we are part of the National Health Council. And that
Okay.
includes organizations like American Heart and
Right.
American Cancer, all the way to smaller organizations and smaller diseases. And their role is about patients, making sure patients are taken care of. But if we don't have research, if we're preventing patients to help find cures, like all of us are doing,
Yeah.
then we're all in trouble. So I'm wondering
Right.
if that type of coordination, I'd be happy to make an introduction to the CEO of the National Health Council. I
Love
didn't know if
that.
you had a connection with them yet.
I didn't. I didn't. I've worked with American Heart quite a bit on, issues that they have faced internally targeting from animal rights groups, but have never talked with the National Health Council, but would love to leverage their connections, their patient stories, because as you exactly said, how do we bring together both the research that's needed for all of the disease work and cures that they're fighting for? We need both.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
I
Happy
would
to. If
love
I can
that.
get your information, I'm
Yeah, yeah. Happy
happy
to put my
to make
email
that
again.
connection. All
Yeah,
right.
that'd
Thank
be wonderful.
Great. So we have some questions in the chat. Asked if you'd be able to share your slides so that maybe
Sure,
ABC could share with members, and then we can kind of use with our own organizations. That would be great.
sure.
Thank you. And another question from Sarah, where does Peer's operating budget come from? And are there donors who could be vocal champions for our message, similar to how animal rights groups garner their own support?
Fun fact, peer is not funded at all. It's completely volunteer based. I would hope to get to that point. But right now, again, this kind of morphed into something I did not fully anticipate when I reached out with a couple emails to some folks. So that is to be determined. I would absolutely love that. I think we could do even more with an actual revenue and budget, but I also recognize the economic constraints, small nonprofits and advocacy groups that can't, pay to participate. And I don't want that to preclude their participation in such an important issue. So right now, it's just volunteer based, but absolutely a strategy that we should leverage because animal rights groups do use their donors to just get out there and change the name of the game. So money talks. We we
Thank
definitely should try to pursue that.
thank you.
Great. I'll round it out. Are there any other questions? Sorry, I should open it up one more time in case anyone has one. All right. I'll round it out, trying to end positive here, right? What opportunities exist right now to shift the narrative or influence policy, Naomi?
I would say keep an eye. So for so long, I know it's policy can be kind of boring. That's why I think a lot of people don't work exclusively in the policy space, and it's not just about going to the Hill. It's about making sure science has a voice and a seat at the table, and that includes submitting public comments to requests for information that come out. To the NIH-wide strategic plan is now out and available for comment until May 16th. Our scientific organizations submitting comments and specifically pointing out the need for animal research. Those sorts of opportunities and strategies are things we need to be a little bit more vigilant on, because for so long the animal rights groups have dominated those venues, and they make a difference. Public opinion and public engagement really does influence and shape how federal agencies shift their priorities. So that's my plug there for stakeholder engagement in federal agency advisory committees, public comment opportunities. Really leverage those resources, and groups like ABC and other groups that really monitor that stuff. They put out those information in the newsletters, like there's a request for information. If you're interested, contact your society and say, like, we should do something. How can I help? And AMP does the same, and Peer really tries to spread the word as well. So really just information sharing, coordinating responses where you can, but getting that word out there about animal research wherever it is feasible.
Great. Thank you so much. And, as Katie shared, ABC will, continue to share information from Peer with our members so that hopefully all of our members can stay informed and engaged. But I'd just like to wrap up quickly. Today's discussion underscores that animal research advocacy is not optional. It is essential to the future of scientific progress. The stakes are very high, not just for the research community, but for the millions of patients waiting for new treatments. We encourage all ABC members to engage with Peer and explore ways to get involved, to amplify accurate messaging within your networks, and to identify opportunities to participate in advocacy efforts. And of course, ABC is here to support you all along the way with all of that. Most importantly, I want to thank you, Naomi, for sharing your expertise and leadership. It's been eye-opening and inspiring. And thank you to all of you for your continued commitment to advancing brain research and improving lives. So thank you so much for joining today, and thank you so, so much, Naomi.
Yeah, thank you. It was great to see everyone. Thank you for the questions.
All right, take care, everyone. Bye.